Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to dig into great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly from obscure sources, where we're looking at earth-shattering discoveries and magnum opuses and tour de forces and cosmologies and all-encompassing theories and grand unified theories. Hopefully we'll help you out with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, and your formation of a holistic worldview. And today's our 218th video we've done on what we call the Reciprocal Church. This is looking at sources like I just mentioned in order to help us to put together a spiritual arsenal, so to speak, a praxis that you can use in your own life to help you get closer to the divine, however you think of that. But we're trying to assemble those kinds of things that you can trust, things that can be verified, things that can even have equations attached to them. And as a result, as a result of the discrediting of all the Western religions that's occurring right now, but in particular the discrediting of Christianity, as it's becoming more and more obvious that Christianity is a Roman invention. It was a psyop done by the Roman Empire, the Caesars in particular, and whoever was working for them, as a piece of wartime propaganda. They were fighting the Jews really incessantly over the course of over a century in the first centuries BC and AD. And they were getting tired of it. They had much more success assimilating other groups of people. The Jews were a thorn in their side, and they had just gotten done fighting the Jews intensely for 7 years in what's called the War of the Jews, 66 to 73 AD. And the two winning generals of that battle became Caesars. They were the father-son duo of Vespasian and Titus, and they're known as the Flavian Caesars, along with their Titus's brother Domitian, who was emperor from 81 to 96 AD. And they decided to do something about it, and they figured that they could mellow out the Jews if they came up with a Jewish hero, a Jewish savior, who believed in turning the other cheek, a prince of peace, one who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and even to walk an extra mile with the Roman soldier's backpack on your back. And many other things. Also kind of a loosening of the strict Jewish law, the Levitical laws, the food restriction, the kosher laws, and the stricture against graven images and circumcision rituals. They wanted to be done with that, and so they had Jesus get rid of that stuff too. Human sacrifice or animal sacrifice, and so they wrote up the Jesus thing. It was first targeted at Jews, but they saw its potential to be also targeted at other oppressed groups within the Roman Empire, such as slaves and soldiers and just regular commoners. And so that's when they came up with the epistles of Paul. And they put together these epistles in order to attract non-Jews. And so you can see an even further movement away from traditional Jewish thought. And the person that's most likely pinned to have been really in charge of all this for Vespasian and Titus was a guy named Arius Calpurnius Piso. And some authors claim to have done a lot of genealogical work, and that really all of the popes and all the future Caesars descend from Arius Calpurnius Piso, who seemed to have played the role of a kind of a shadow emperor, co-emperor to both Vespasian and Titus. His father was executed by Nero, and it looks like it was as a result of proposing this Ur Marcus, which we know as Q, the Q document, to Nero as part of this committee formed by Tiberius, an earlier emperor from 14 to 37 AD, who put together this committee to form a new Roman religion. And people like Seneca and these Piso brothers were in on it, but Nero didn't like it. Nero was a sympathizer of the Jews more than most other emperors, and so they plotted to have him assassinated, and they failed. And Nero found out, and he put them to death, including Seneca, his former tutor. Seneca the Younger. There was another Seneca in the 1st century BC. But Piso took over the mantle from his father, and he passed it on to his kids too. And so over the course of from about 65, 70 AD all the way up until Revelation and Hebrews were written, way up into the 130s or even 140 AD. The Pisos gradually put together all of these writings, but not only just the Gospels and not only just the epistles, but the rest of the Bible, including Revelation, which may be really a reveal of kind of their plot, written by one of the grandsons, who wasn't really on board with the whole thing. And so he kind of revealed a little bit too much. They wanted to be discovered eventually, but they didn't want to be discovered in their own lifetime. And so Piso wrote under various, just an array of pseudonyms. And he also wrote the early church fathers, all of the early church fathers, like Saint Ignatius and Origen. These people were all fake pseudonyms of Arius Piso. And he was also, Pliny the Younger was also in on it as a foster brother of Arius Piso. And so Pliny played the part of Paul. He wrote the epistles. And if you read Pliny's epistles, there's a lot to compare. But what we're doing is we're actually looking at the work of Michael Menescotz, who compares the book of Luke in particular, but the Gospels in general, with Josephus's book called The Jewish War, or Wars of the Jews, of 66 to 73 AD. It's a history, and you probably have heard of Josephus because Josephus is really the only 1st century author, secular author, who was known to have corroborated the existence of Jesus, who actually mentions Jesus' name. But when you read Josephus's autobiography, you find out that Josephus was a defector from the Jews, and he defected to Vespasian, predicted he would become emperor. And when he did become emperor, Vespasian pardoned Josephus, brought him to Rome as one of the court historians, and adopted him as a member of his family. So Josephus was a Roman royal, more or less, and therefore not to be trusted as far as, telling you history. But not only that, if you read Josephus's Wars of the Jews in unison with reading the Gospels, you find out rather quickly that they were written by the same authors, whoever Josephus was, if he was Arius Calpurnius Piso or somebody else. And that's what Menescats is doing in this book, is he's comparing and finding all the parallels between Wars of the Jews and the Book of Luke. And he graphs them out with the Book of Luke on the vertical axis and Wars of the Jews on the horizontal axis. He numbers them, Luke chapters 1 through 24, and Book Wars of the Jews paragraphs 1 through 700 or so. Now, I do have a little bit of an issue with his numbering system, this 1 to 700, because it's hard to kind of grok out the paragraphs. He would have been better off just using page numbers or using the actual headings of Wars of the Jews. It's got chapters and it's got books that he could have broken it down, and I believe that he would have gotten the same graph regardless. But what he does, the graph spells out 5 Roman letters, APTVS, which I think stands for Arius Piso Titus Vespasianus. The last part, TVS, is actually on some imprinted on some minted coins from the Roman Empire from that period. So the TVS is certainly not something I'm making up. And the Arius Piso, now Menescats thinks that might be some other things. So we'll hear him out, see what he has to say about this over the course of this book. Now this book gets into pretty great detail because you have to really suss out. Some of the parallels are very obvious. Some of them you really have to suss them out. Yesterday we went through a very concentrated set of passages from these 2 books, and you could read them side by side and really probably not even notice anything. But if you look at it very closely, you can see that they paralleled each other in about 7 different places in detail, specific places. And so the Bible, if nothing else, is a work of evil genius. These people put a lot of magic into this in order to hypnotize people. It is a powerful piece of propaganda. They weaved in just layer upon layer of meaning into this thing, and we'll be going over that a little bit more after we're done with the Menescats book, which is going to take a while because this guy puts 2,000-3,000 words on one page. Okay, now I'm going to read this last paragraph that we read yesterday again. But what he's basically doing is he's showing you that, okay, Wars of the Jews and the Book of Luke were really written by the same sources, and a lot of the things that Jesus prophesies in the Gospels, in the Book of Luke, are fulfilled by Titus, the general or emperor, or in some cases Vespasian, his father, who is also the general and the emperor, in Wars of the Jews. So when Jesus says, I'm going to make you fishers of men, Titus's men actually literally become fishers of men, as they all the Jews that they're fighting against fall into the water, and they spear the Jews and harpoon them. So it's that kind of humor. It's they're mocking you with this. Not only are they coming up with these parallels, but the parallels are grim and in poor taste and show a level of hatred toward the Jews. So you are worshiping this book at your own peril. I'm trying to warn you about it. I'm not don't have any issues with your Christianity per se. It comes, there's a feeling that we have that comes from deep inside. Your personal experience of the Christ is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this book that is a mind trap. It's a booby trapped in so many different ways. So and so what he's basically saying here in this argument, the first half, is he's saying, okay, the wars of the Jews is supposed to be a history. Now, maybe it isn't a history, maybe it's propaganda, but the war actually occurred. It has been verified in other ways, and particularly archaeologically, that and the destroyed cities, broken walls, and so on. The war actually did occur. Now, whether it occurred the way that Josephus portrays it is another matter, but at least we're talking about an event that actually happened. And then he says, by contrast, in Jesus' story, it is undeniable that whilst Jesus avoids claiming to be God's son, the story aims to lead the reader to that conclusion. Therefore, if Jesus' story is factual, this requires us to accept a God whose son was able to magically fill the fishermen's nets to bursting, and who later walked on water and on that same lake and turned water to wine in that region, among other miracles such as raising people from the dead. It is remarkable how the independent evidence for Jesus Christ is totally absent. Astonishingly, Jesus left behind no writings, no monuments, no remains, no family, no scriptures. No sculptures, no inscriptions, nor anything else at all. And amazingly, there is no independent record of his existence. No local government records discussing his incredible miracles, and perhaps most tellingly, nothing about him at all, independent or otherwise, was written during his own lifetime. So Josephus's Wars of the Jews was actually the corroborating evidence from Josephus is not from Wars of the Jews. It is from his book called Jewish Antiquities, which wasn't published until 93 A.D. So that's like 60 years later. So it's not a contemporary source. Now, what the Flavian Caesars did is they wrote the story in the 70s, which is the time where experts, historians claim that the Gospels were written, approximately. And they backdated it by 40 years. And so Joseph Atwill, in his book, Caesar's Messiah, shows how many of these parallels occur offset by exactly 40 years to the day. The parallels, so when Jesus prophesies something to happen at the end of the generation, it happens literally 40 years exactly later. Now, I don't know if that's all the events. Some of the events, I think, are just spaced out by approximately 40 years. Not sure, though. We'll dig into that. Okay. However, if the reader is unconvinced, I would suggest that the way this parody is constructed becomes more obvious as you read more of it. And since this was merely an excerpt of a much larger parody, the way it is constructed will become clearer as we go. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I see it as well. The evidence just becomes overwhelming. You know, you hear one parallel, you can chalk it up to coincidence. You hear 5 parallels, you can still kind of rationalize it, you know, always looking for that. But when you hear like, you know, 100 parallels, then you finally you kind of just have to give up. Okay, we are finally at chapter 2, which is called The Flavian Emperor's Plan for a Mithraism-Style Secrecy Cult. Now, that was his thesis again, remember at the beginning, where he talked about, you know, gradually you had this secrecy cult. Gradually, you started out with Jesus, and then eventually you would recognize that, well, actually, Jesus is just a prophet of Titus. Jesus predicts his own second coming, and his second coming is Titus. And so gradually you let go of the Jesus worship and you move straight to the emperor worship. Now, I don't necessarily buy into that thesis, but I'm willing to consider it based on see what kind of evidence he has. Okay, in chapter 1, I showed the existence of remarkable parallels between Jewish war and the Gospel of Luke, albeit just the one section of text in each document. More will follow. Here I will explain Emperor Vespasian's motives for doing this, the role of his sons, Emperor Titus and Emperor Domitian, and what the overarching strategy was. I will also explain why my discoveries and thesis offers greater explanatory power than other theories, whilst also requiring fewer starting assumptions. According to the surviving record of the Great War, it was the 2 Flavian generals, Vespasian and his son Titus, who led the invasion of Judea in 66 AD. After its rebellion over the taxes required by Rome, and who destroyed the heart of Jerusalem in 69 AD. Jerusalem with its holy temple, which the Jews believed to be their God's physical seat on earth. Vespasian must have been quite the strategist, as he was not only chosen to reclaim Judea, but whilst doing so, he managed to organize his allies around him, such that he could return to emerge as the victor of Rome's civil war in Rome and claim the throne of the empire. Anyone who doubts his expertise and strategy is underestimating him. Well, it is true that when Nero died in 68 AD, then we had the year of the 4 emperors. So in quick succession, we had Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, all named emperor, and all 3 were eventually deposed. I think 2 of them were assassinated, if not all 3. And then Vespasian came in after that and created stability. He stayed emperor for the last 10 years of his life. Okay, Vespasian gained the throne of the Roman Empire during that same year, 69 AD, that Titus destroyed Jerusalem. And he authorized the publication of an official record of their victories called the Jewish War during the AD 70s, CE, whatever, AD CE 70s. Now he said the official record, that is true, but the author is claimed to have been Josephus. He doesn't mention that right there, but I'll just put that in there. Thanks to Joseph Atwill's bestseller, Caesar's Messiah, it is already known, also his second book called Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. It is already known to many people that the story of Jesus in Luke is a parable or parody of the Flavian emperor's victories as told in Jewish war. Whilst Atwill's evidence points strongly to Luke being Roman government propaganda, this book sets out the evidence that enables us to prove it. This section is called Emperor Vespasian Had the Means, Motive, and Opportunity to Create Jesus' Story. The means. Having retaken Judea and become emperor of the Roman Empire, Vespasian was now an absolute dictator. He was in a position to instruct the Roman-controlled synagogues in Judea and elsewhere of what narrative they should promote and what documents they should show the commoners. He didn't need to write the story himself. He would have ordered a large team of experts to be assembled and simply told them the outcome they must work towards and achieve. The opportunity. Vespasian's son Titus had just destroyed Jerusalem, which the Jews believed to be the actual physical seat of God on earth. Jewish war describes the systematic destruction being so total as to leave no sign of habitation, which is a pointed jibe aimed at the Jewish belief that God lived there. Clearly, the utter destruction of God's physical seat on earth would have undermined Jewish beliefs and left the Jews casting around for a new direction for their faith. I feel like he's just kind of repeating this from the introduction. Along with the death of the Jewish high priests, this gave Vespasian a window of opportunity where the Jews would be vulnerable to, quote, good news of an extraordinary Messiah with divine, prophetic, and healing abilities who was described as having lived and died a generation earlier, thereby conveniently preventing anyone from refuting it. The motives. Vespasian was a man facing many problems at once, and his motives included retaining the throne, for which he needed to maintain the loyalty of the legions and the Praetorian Guard, avoiding being killed, which was what had happened to his 4 recent predecessors when they had lost the throne, indeed in very quick succession over the previous 12-month period, because Nero was assassinated too, so all 4 of them were assassinated. Convincing Jews to render taxes, this being one of the issues which had led Judea to rebel. So to render taxes to Caesar, a term which by that time simply meant the emperor, and avoiding a repeat of the costly war to crush Judea's bid for independence. Also, making the commoners, especially Jews, tolerate oppression, the other main reason that Judea had rebelled. Convincing Roman soldiers to accept low pay, since maintaining the legions was almost financially crippling the empire, and it was very expensive to buy their loyalty with higher pay. And keeping his descendants in power for generations, making the empire permanently loyal to his family. Okay, I just gotta load up the new page. And I'm trying to zoom in here. Help me, please. There we go. All of this was achievable if he could secure the total and indeed permanent loyalty of the empire's peoples, including especially the Jews, the legion soldiers, and the Praetorian Guard in Rome. As a case in point, the 12 months prior to Vespasian's reign had seen 4 emperors killed in quick succession. So his priority was to avoid being the 5th casualty. If not only the Jews, but also the commoners and slaves could somehow be made to be loyal to him, he would have a stronger grip on the throne. And if he could make the legions and Rome's Praetorian Guard undyingly loyal to him, he could prevent coups and assassinations. Vespasian had also just spent 3 years fighting Jews in Judea to suppress their rebellion, which even now threatened to immediately erupt again. If that were to force him to send the legions straight back into another big war, they might tire of him. But if he failed to send the legions, it risked other regions and potential disintegration of his empire. This explains why it was so important to Vespasian to obtain the loyalty of his enemy, the Jews. Vespasian's empire was also struggling to fund the incredibly expensive legions. Underpaying them risked losing their loyalty, which is why Vespasian needed to collect taxes. This again points to his need for Jews to render taxes. My thesis is that his strategy, and later that of his son Titus, was to design Jesus' story and publish this good news, albeit with hidden messages concealed within it, which could later be revealed to indicate that the emperor himself was the second coming of Jesus, to thereby convince all the Jews, commoners, slaves, and indeed the legions to see him as their God. However, this was not enough. The empire's objective was to make everyone adopt pure emperor worship. So it was necessary to include additional hidden messages within the Gospels that could later be revealed to show that Jesus was just a fiction, and indeed merely a parable about the emperor, in order that the emperor worshippers could be made to become pure emperor worshippers. Okay, we're going to leave it right there. We will start up just before this, again, when we resume tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great